Welcome, Dr. Chaney. It's an honor and a privilege to have you with us this evening and to be doing this webinar for us on finding a company you can trust in the unregulated world of vitamins. And we are just, we're humbled, I guess, in a way, to have Dr. Chaney with us. He has his a bachelor's in chemistry from Duke University, a PhD in biochemistry from UCLA, and has the distinction of being professor emeritus from the University of North Carolina, where he taught biochemistry and nutrition to medical and dental students for 40 years. That's a lot of nutrition that you were teaching. Mm-hmm. Dr. Chaney has also won numerous awards, which I think is just fabulous, including the Academy of Educators Excellence in Teaching Lifetime Achievement Award, which was very, very special and a very high honor. And in addition to all of that, Dr. Chaney ran an active cancer research program at the University of North Carolina and has published over 100 scientific articles and reviews in peer-reviewed scientific journals. And what that means is he has to make sure he's got his I's dotted and his T's crossed, or they would never have been published. You really have to have the sound science and documentation in doing that. And so Dr. Chaney is a perfect person to guide us through tonight. In addition to having authored 2 chapters on nutrition in one of the leading biochemistry textbooks for medical students. And thank goodness, Dr. Chaney, that you did that, because I think we all like it when our doctors have a little more nutrition knowledge under their belt. So this evening we will again be exploring this whole world of unregulated world of vitamins, and Dr. Chaney will guide us into how we can do a good job of that.
Very good. So we are off and running, and we want to begin by acknowledging why there is so much confusion in the marketplace for consumers to figure out who they can trust and who they can believe. When you see, I just grabbed a couple of the headlines, but for heaven's sakes, there was one that said, case closed, multivitamin should never be used. At the same time, I found another article saying, and headlines, that vitamin E may slow Alzheimer's. I mean, it is, and I could have picked a zillion of them, that it's, the marketplace is flooded with vitamins, with herbals, with weight loss programs. There's a zillion people writing books and blogs and news reports. And there's a lot of conflicting messages, and it is very hard, I think, for consumers to sort through that. So tonight, we want to discuss 2 areas to shed some light on how you can evaluate quality vitamins. And the first is we want to kind of give you a little peek behind the scenes of how vitamin products are made in the industry as a whole, and then more specifically in Shaklee, so that you see the stark contrast in those 2 approaches. And then we're going to ask Professor Chaney if he would give us some specifics about ingredients that you often will hear criticisms about, or articles and blogs written about, warning and labeling things dangerous and so forth. And some of that is kind of rhetoric and has no science behind it. So Steve is going to sort through that for us. So we want to talk about the formulation and the manufacture of vitamin supplements. And the reality is that this is an extremely sophisticated and complex challenge and process, and far more than most consumers understand. So when we read an article here and there and say, oh my gosh, some ingredient must be bad, it's very hard for us, most of us as consumers, to know how to evaluate whether that is intended for headline grabbing or whether it really is valid. And so labels don't tell us very much. I was mentioning before we started this evening that we had a wonderful conversation with Dr. Daggy, the head of Shaklee Science, Chief Science Officer, a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying, there are many nutrients that we know have tons of studies proving how beneficial they are to the body. Fish oils and omega-3 fatty acids, for one, in terms of heart disease and reduction of inflammation. There's tons and tons of research on that. Carotenoids regarding eye health. He mentioned in particular polyphenols, and yet, because there is no recommended daily allowance established for those products, they cannot be, quantities can be put on the label. And so consumers have no way of knowing. And there's very little to no regulation of the vitamin industry, and there is no requirement on the part of vitamin companies to do any clinical testing of any kind. There is a lot of conflicting results on studies, and some of the, quote, studies that we read about in these articles are very poorly designed. They haven't created proper controls for factors that could skew the results, and it's very difficult for a consumer to go back and read the original research to see what is valid and what is not, because the purpose of it often is about making headlines. So, Steve, with that, I'm going to turn this over to you, and if you would walk us through a little bit more about how products are developed. Did you want me to cover one more slide on this?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay, all right. Sorry, I just see you put my name on there. Well, what was fascinating when we spoke with Dr. Daggy at Shaklee was that the product development is a very complex, multi-stepped process that begins by reviewing all the research that they can find that has been established in, for a given area. Most recently, for example, Shaklee just introduced a really remarkable product regarding improvement in cognitive function, and they were researching these various ingredients that seem to improve the connectivity between neurons in the brain. So they will research that body of information. But then after they do that, then they start working on formulation, and then they test. And then they don't stop there. Then they do more research, and then they test some more, as they keep working on these. And what's interesting for most companies, after they read a bit of the literature, that's where they stop and say, well, this looks like it's kind of an interesting trendy ingredient, and they don't bother to test it to see if it's really valid, whether either in the process of the formulation or in the end product. That's number one. Number two is, it is really difficult in today's world, Dr. Daggy told us, because our world is so increasingly polluted, that it is very difficult to find suppliers that will provide ingredients that will meet Shaklee standards, which are very high. So Shaklee doesn't just accept that something is organically grown, meaning that they didn't spray it with herbicides and pesticides. They test the potency, they test the level of the active ingredients, and they test for 350 contaminants, when the U.S. Pharmacopoeia recommendation is only for 80, and they will test 350. And when they find them, they reject the batch, and then it's sold to somebody else. And so a consumer can't know that just from reading a label. But it's important to all of us to know that, because that's why Always Safe, which is one of the components of the Shaklee philosophy, is something Shaklee takes very seriously. And then they look even further. They virtually go worldwide looking for sources for the ingredients that they're looking for. And then Dr. Daggy told us about this wonderful PhD that is on staff in the research and development labs, who is an expert in quality assurance. And she has developed protocols not just for testing at the end of the production of a product, but it's built into every step of the manufacturing process. Fascinating. It is the highest level of quality assurance that you can have, almost to the point that you almost don't ever need to test at the end product because you have built it in all the way through the process. So the last thing is that it's really, really difficult for all vitamin companies is that they have to figure out what the Food and Drug Administration will allow them to say about the benefits of their finished product, even when there's tons and tons of research and clinicals and all kinds of solid evidence about it. They still are very restricted, and the problem that becomes for the consumer is to read between the lines to figure out how they can use these products and really what kind of benefit it will bring to them. So with that, Professor, as a little background, then let's talk specifically about Shaklee products and how the ingredients are selected. You want to take this one?
Well, sure. I mean, I think this is pretty much what you know already. The ingredients have to be proven safe. They have to be proven pure. And you talked a little bit about how difficult that is. And, you know, a minute ago when you were talking about what the FDA requires, I just thought I'd comment on that. You know, Shaklee takes that very seriously. Some of our competitors don't. Shaklee is a leading company. We have never run afoul of the FDA or the FTC. But some other companies, some of those smaller companies out there really don't care about that. So you'll see some pretty wild claims from other companies and maybe wonder why Shaklee doesn't do that. But on the other hand, you've got to appreciate that Shaklee has never been in trouble in almost 60 years now with the FTC or the FDA for making a claim that isn't supported. So that, I think, is really important. Now, let's talk about some of the examples here. Talk about examples in terms of purity. You talked about the process that Shaklee goes through, but then I think you kind of referred to a little bit of what happens with other companies, but there are two really, really important examples that illustrate that from us. One of them goes back years, and that was the ginseng. So there was a year, this is, I guess, 15 years or more ago, they had a very wet year in China, where most of the ginseng comes from. And it turns out that as they were storing ginseng in their warehouses, a lot of it became moldy, or was starting to become moldy. So they sprayed it with something to prevent the mold from occurring. I forgot what it was, some toxic chemical. Quintazine. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, Shaklee got their usual supply in from their supplier. They tested it, too much quintazine. They rejected it. They went to another supplier, tested again, rejected it. It turned out that Shaklee went a whole year without making their ginseng product because they couldn't find a pure source. Every other company out there continued to market ginseng. Either they didn't test or they didn't care.
And at that time, I want to point out, ginseng at that time in the American marketplace was the fourth top-selling herbal product. And they said, we won't produce it. Rather, and the amount of quintazine, which is a fungicide, that was in that was under the limit that the Food and Drug Administration allows, but Shaklee standards are zero tolerance, no pesticides, no herbicides, no fungicides. And so they made nothing until they could reformulate that and find a clean source.
And the crushing balls, that's another great story. Barb, why don't you share that one?
Well, that was interesting too. They one of their herbal products They sometimes contract out to contract manufacturers, but they must then meet the Shaklee standards, and Shaklee then has people on site who do the testing. And Shaklee tests everything. They test the raw ingredients at the beginning, and then they test it at the end. And what they found is they had these very pure raw ingredients that they were providing to the manufacturer, but at the end of the process where these herbs are being crushed, they found tiny levels of lead in the finished product, and they couldn't figure out where it was coming from because it wasn't in the raw ingredients. And because of Shaklee, they were able to work with the manufacturer and trace it back. They were using lead to line the crushing balls that crushed the herbs into the powdered formulation. And because of that, they not only helped improve and meet the standards of Shaklee, but from then on, whoever else that manufacturer used, now they benefited from it as well. That's the kind of thing that Shaklee does. And there's some great examples, but want to at least share a couple with you so you can understand the specifics of it. Okay, let's go to the next, Steve.
Okay, so let's talk about, this is the part of the webinar which really is going to address a lot of the questions that you get about ingredients from some of your customers. And we can't possibly cover all of those in one webinar, but let's talk about where some of those myths come from. Because, it often starts out as a blog or a website. Here is a perfect example in the background. Diane Gregg's The Hidden Dangers of Soy. Now, who knows who Diane Gregg is? Whether she has any degree, whether she knows what she's talking about. But there it is. It's on the internet. So everybody, of course, is going to believe it. The message is spectacular. Hidden Dangers of Soy, the truth about soy revealed. Spectacular message. It's based on the bias of the author, and my take on it is they never let the facts get in the way of a good story. And what happens is the media picks it up, and the media isn't trained how to interpret scientific studies or to know whether something on the web is accurate or not. So they then propagate it. They repeat it over and over again. Because after all, you got to figure out if you've picked up the newspaper or if you watch the news on whatever internet system however you connect with the internet, it's never the good news that predominates. It's the man bites dog. It's the gross murders, all of those sorts of things. That's spectacular. The bad news that sells the subscriptions, it gets people interested. So it's the bad stuff that gets repeated. Whether it's true or not, it gets repeated. And once it becomes repeated often enough, it becomes generally accepted as true. I mean, didn't I see it in four or five different websites? Mm-hmm. It becomes what I call an urban myth.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, that's the challenges that, and I'm going to come back to this in a minute. You know that Shaklee, when they select their ingredients, they select ingredients that are going to be safe, they select ingredients that are going to be effective, and whenever possible, they select ingredients that are green in some way or another. And it's always based on science, not on myth. So that's the problem with some of these controversial ingredients. It's these are ingredients that are where the problems are really mythical. They're not real. And Shaklee looks at those and says, okay, we're getting a lot of people that say that we shouldn't change ingredient X, ingredient Y, or ingredient Z. What are we going to replace it with if we changed it? Well, we're going to talk about that in a minute, but it's often very, very difficult to find a replacement ingredient that will meet Shaklee's purity standards. Mm. Other companies don't care about that, but Shaklee does. So here are just a couple of examples. We're going to talk about soy in a minute. It's a perfectly safe protein source. But there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of myth on the internet about that. There are urban myths about soy. There are actually some people who are sensitive to soy. So Shaklee's investigated alternative protein sources. One of the ones you see most often is pea protein. And when Shaklee's looked into these alternate protein sources, so far they've been unable to find a supplier that could meet their standards of purity. That hasn't stopped other companies with coming out with these alternate protein sources. But with Shaklee, you can't just pick any other protein source. You've got to find one that also meets their standards of purity. Omega-3 fatty acids are another example because vegetarians have requested an algae source of omega-3s. That's another very popular source of omega-3s nowadays. Yes, that's a picture of pond scum in the lower right corner there, but that's another word for algae. But again, when Shaklee investigated the possible sources, none of them met their purity and potency standards. So it's not always as easy as it seems. So let's now go to some of the myths that are out there and zero in on a few common ingredients that you may have heard about. So let's start with microcrystalline cellulose. The word that you'll hear used on some of these internet blogs is it's just a filler. So what is microcrystalline cellulose? So it's finely ground wood pulp. You may have seen it described as sawdust. But if you think about this, it's natural, it's organic, nobody sprays trees before they harvest them, it's non-GMO, there aren't any genetically modified trees out there, it's pure, there are no toxic chemicals required for processing, and it's also green because you're taking stuff that would otherwise be waste and now you're reusing it. So there's a lot of good stuff to be said about microcrystalline cellulose. Why does Shaklee use it? Well, but that's because it absorbs water. One of the things we know about Vital E, and if you haven't done this before, take Vital E, you put it in a glass of water, and within 5 or 10 minutes, it just starts falling apart. That's because of all the microcrystalline cellulose that absorbs water, it expands, and it makes that Vital E break down very quickly, and that improves the bioavailability of the nutrients in the Vital E. So a very important reason for using it. But what are some of the myths you hear about it? One of the myths you hear is it's toxic. Well, if you actually look into that, that's based on a single rat study in which the rats were given huge amounts. It's considered safe by the FDA, the USDA, the World Health Organization. Every major organization that's looked at it considers it perfectly safe. I looked at one of these websites, and they were talking about, well, nanoparticles are taken up by cells, and that's got to be dangerous. Well, first place, microcrystalline cellulose is microparticle size, not nanoparticle size. And for those of you who aren't mathematicians, microparticles are 6 orders of magnitude larger than nanoparticles. This stuff isn't taken up by cells. Now you'll hear, some people will question methyl cellulose, hydroxypropyl cellulose. The story is very similar with them. The only difference is they are chemical derivatives of the cellulose, but other than that, they're perfectly safe. Those are usually used as emulsifiers, thickeners, binding agents. That's how they're used in supplements. And then there's sugar and the artificial sweeteners. And I'm sure you get so many inquiries, I know we all do. Oh, there's so much sugar in the products. Why do they put sugar in this product, that product, or the other product? And there are always valid reasons. It's, you could have the greatest product in the world, but if it didn't taste good enough that people wanted to use it, it would just sit on the shelf. But there are some other so that's sugars make the food more palatable. They make supplements more palatable in some cases. But here's another thing. People ask, why is there so much sugar in the protein? And that's because carbohydrates are important in helping us utilize protein efficiently. So what happens is the brain and the blood cells need a constant supply of glucose. That's the only energy source that they can use. So if we're not getting enough carbohydrate, if we're not getting enough carbohydrates and sugars in our food supply, in what we're eating, our bodies take the protein that we eat and they convert it to glucose to keep our brain and red blood cells alive. That's an adaptation. It's a survival mechanism, but all of the protein that our body is converting to glucose to keep our brain and red blood cells alive isn't being used to build muscle. It's not being used to rebuild tissue. So having the carbohydrates along with the protein helps us utilize that protein more efficiently. Something biochemists have called protein sparing. And sugars and carbs from natural sources, we'll talk more about that in a minute, how they should be eaten with fiber and protein. Now, the bad news is if we eat too much sugar, particularly the refined sugars, that can generate high levels of insulin, which is damaging the brain, the blood vessels, our immune system, a lot of other things. Too much sugar in our bloodstream can feed cancer cells. We can deplete calcium from our bones. It's addicting. We have a natural inherent taste for sweetness. But we're going to talk about the relationship between sugar and insulin levels, because it's really how much sugar gets into the bloodstream at one time and what it does to our insulin levels. But let's talk about the sugar villains that you hear about. And it's kind of interesting. For those of us that have been around a little while, they say with age comes wisdom. I'm not so sure about that, but with age... With age comes perspective. Because those of us who were around in the 70s, remember there was a book called Sugar Blues, and there were a lot of other articles and books at the time telling us that sucrose and dextrose, which is the chemical name for glucose, were villains. They cause obesity, diabetes, high triglycerides, heart attack, and stroke. And then in the 80s, it was the sugar alcohols, xylitol, mannitol, sorbitol, galactitol. These are all natural sugars. They metabolize the glucose in our bodies. They can cause diarrhea if we consume too much of them, but they were the villains of the era. And today, it's fructose and high fructose corn syrup. And guess what? We're being told that fructose and high fructose corn syrup cause obesity, diabetes, high triglycerides, heart attack, and stroke. Well, isn't that what we were told sucrose and dextrose did back in the 70s? And in the 80s, the sugar alcohols, So the simple thing is there are no hero sugars. There are no good sugars. And, Barbara, I know you don't like complicated pictures, but I have to show this one.
I know. I took this for everyone to know. I removed all the graphs and you put them back. Okay, tell us the graph. All right, we'll all hang on this. Go.
So these are different sugar sources. The orange is the amount of fructose in each one. The green is the amount of glucose, and the yellow is other sugars that are in them. The top one is high fructose corn syrup 42. You go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's high fructose corn syrup 55. Those are the two main forms of high fructose corn syrup that are used in foods nowadays. Those are our villains. We're told we shouldn't eat those. We should be eating honey. Well, look at how much sucrose is in honey. More than is, it's right in the middle of those high fructose corn syrups. Look how much fructose, and we're told we can use the fruit juice sweeteners when we do our cooking. Well, look how much sucrose is in those. Or agave nectar is supposed to be a great source of healthy sugar. It has the highest fructose level of any of them. So,
Dr. Chaney?
Yes.
Excuse me, but what's the difference between fructose and glucose? Was I sleeping when you...
They are both simple sugars. It is, and it's a chemical distinction. They have slightly different. The chemical word is enantiomers. It's slightly different orientations, and one is a keto sugar, the other is an aldehyde sugar.
Well, that certainly clears it up for me.
Well,
okay.
Okay. My wife reminded me that the thing that's important for for the non-chemist in the audience,
Right.
is that glucose is absorbed much more rapidly than fructose.
Okay.
So if you want to have, and that's why Shaklee used fructose in their Cinch product, and they use it in some of their other products, is because it's absorbed more slowly. So it causes less of an increase in blood sugar levels, which also causes less of an increase in insulin levels.
Okay.
So my point here, if we consumed as much honey or agave nectar, which people are telling us are great sugar sources, as we do fructose or high fructose corn syrup, they'd be just as bad for us. There are no good sugars. It really is what we eat the sugars with, and that's the whole glycemic index concept, which is really looking at what is the effect of the sugar that we eat on the levels of sugar that ends up in our bloodstream, and therefore the levels of insulin that sugar caused to be produced. It turns out that what we consume with the sugar is more important than the sugar itself, particularly if we have soluble fiber, which is what we find in fresh fruits and vegetables, or when we consume it with protein, which is why the sugars that you find in the Shaklee proteins are not particularly bad. And again, yes, another graph here, but I put this in for a very specific purpose. It's an interesting, something you wouldn't expect, but it has to do with what we eat along with the sugar. So this is looking at the effect on either blood sugar or insulin levels from eating the same amount of carbohydrate as carrots and as ice cream. Carrots actually give you a higher blood sugar level and a higher spike in insulin than ice cream.
It's amazing.
When you eat the same amount of carbohydrate, because ice cream has protein in it and has soluble fiber.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then there's the artificial stuff. You've got the saccharin, which can increase the risk of bladder cancer. You've got the aspartame that breaks down the chemicals that can be neurotoxic. Sucralose destroys a healthy bacteria, can be metabolized to toxic substances. The sulfame can increase the risk of lung and breast cancer. And we're told that these things are safe. Well, they may or may not be, but for me, it's all about avoiding the oops factor. And think about it. Again, this is where, with age, comes perspective. But for those that have been around for a while, how many times have we been told by the FDA that a particular artificial sweetener or a particular food additive was safe, only be told later that, whoops, we made a mistake. It's dangerous. After all, you got to stop using it. Mm-hmm. So, so we want to avoid those artificial ones. So that's why stevia, if you want a non-caloric sweetener, is a much better choice. It's interesting, you look at some of the blogs out there, and they'll call it an artificial sweetener. No, it comes from a plant. It's got a natural history of long use, thousands of years in South America, at least 20 or 30 years in Japan. It's approved as safe in every country of the world. But taste can be an issue with stevia. So it usually needs to be combined with either a sugar or an artificial sweetener. So you have to read the label of the actual product to make sure that what you're getting the stevia with is not an artificial sweetener. But other than that, it's perfectly safe. So if we just sum it up, there are no sugar villains. There are no sugar heroes. We do eat too much added sugar. That's right. But the food is more important than the sugar. It's what we eat with the sugar that makes all the difference in the world. Artificial sweeteners have risk, and they have no proven benefits. And we're eating more artificial sweeteners than ever, and we seem to be gaining more weight than ever. They're obviously not working. So why use them?
Amen.
Okay. So let's talk about soy. Again, starting with some of the myths. One of the ones you've heard is that soy is going to increase your risk of breast cancer. The actual data are that soy consumption, if we look over a lifetime, soy consumption decreases the risk of breast cancer by 25 to 58%.
Wow.
But there was a study done back in 2009 where they looked at 5,000 subjects who already had breast cancer, so they're breast cancer survivors, and they found that following the breast cancer, the ones that consume the highest soy intake had a 25% less chance of breast cancer recurrence and 25% less chance of dying from breast cancer. There have been 4 other clinical studies since then that have all come to the same conclusion. One of the other things is you'll hear is that soy is going to affect your thyroid hormone levels. Well, there was a study published in the journal Thyroid in 2006 that looked at 14 clinical studies. And from all of those clinical studies, the end result was that soy protein consumption has no significant effect on blood levels of thyroid hormones. And then you'll hear that it's, if you're a male, that's going to it's going to feminize you. It's going to decrease your male fertility. Well, those are based on the name that are given to they call them
phytoestrogens.
They call the soy isoflavones are called phytoestrogens because they resemble estrogen. Well, if you were a biochemist, now it's a good thing you all aren't, but I wouldn't wish. Well, let me put that. I wouldn't wish that on everybody.
Good.
They'd be drawing graphs all day long, right?
That's right. If we only need a few of us, we'd be dangerous if there were too many of us. But if you were a biochemist, you'd know that the structure of testosterone is very similar to the structure of estrogen. Soy isoflavones resemble testosterone as much as they do estrogen. And again, clinical studies, here's one published in Fertility and Sterility in 2009 showing that soy isoflavones have absolutely no effect on total or free testosterone, testosterone binding protein, androgen index. And another one published in the same journal in 2010 looked at total soy had no effect on total and free testosterone. And hey, if you really want to talk about what counts, it had no effect on sperm count or sperm motility. There just really wasn't any basis to those myths. And I could go on and on about soy, but you kind of get the point. The respect to all those anti-soy websites and blogs, it's pretty simple. The emperor has no clothes.
Okay, that takes us to carrageenan.
Okay, so let's talk about carrageenan. What is carrageenan? Well, carrageenan actually comes from seaweeds and red algae. And if you were to look at the blogs like that one in the lower left corner, they're going to say it's a dangerous, sneaky, commonly used food additive. It's bad for you. Well, it's actually been used for thousands of years for its gelling properties. But in food supplement manufacturing, it helps improve the consistency and the disintegration of tablets. Now, again, if you think about the good things, it's natural. It's non-GMO. This comes from seaweed. We don't have genetically modified seaweed, and it's a completely natural source. The FDA, the USDA, the World Health Organization have reviewed all the available studies and have concluded that carrageenan is absolutely safe. The International Agency for Research on Cancer. Now, this is a group that documents all of the dangerous cancer-causing chemicals that could possibly get into our food supply. And they review this on a regular basis. They are the gold standard for whether something's carcinogenic or not. And they've concluded that carrageenan does not cause cancer. So there's no substance to what you see. Now, where does it come from? Again, there's usually sometimes a kernel of a truth that gets amplified. It turns out there's a breakdown substance from carrageenan called polygenin. And polygenin can cause diarrhea, hemorrhage, and ulcerations when used in very high levels in animal studies. But the levels they use in animal studies are much higher than you could ever get for natural food-grade carrageenan. So food-grade carrageenan has no negative effects in animal studies, never been shown to cause colon cancer. And if you really look at the natural alternatives, and Shaklee has things like gum arabic, some of the cellulose derivatives I talked about previously, You've got some of the same kind of myths in the literature. So yes, there are alternatives out there, but I don't think they'd make your customers any happier. So the bottom line here, once again, carrageenan concerns are urban myths. It's natural, non-GMO, and safe. No human studies have shown any problems with carrageenan. All the major organizations consider it safe. And so here's the one thing. People talk about digestive issues. So as with any other natural food, some people are going to have food allergies to carrageenan. And sometimes food allergies can be severe. I mean, think of peanut allergies, for example. Nowadays, if you have somebody with a severe peanut allergy on the same airplane, they can't serve peanuts to anybody in the cabin because it can be so allergenic to some people. So yes, any natural food is going to cause problems for some people, but that doesn't mean it's unsafe. It's just people have food allergies.
And that takes us to maltodextrin.
So that's another one, and it's interesting. That's one that I've seen it classified as another artificial sweetener. And nothing could be further from the truth. So where does maltodextrin come from? It comes from starch. Now, we will come back to this in a minute. In the U.S., the major source of maltodextrin is from corn, the starch you get from corn. And yes, corn is mostly genetically modified. So we'll come back to that in a minute. In Europe, the major source is wheat. But here's the thing that most people aren't thinking about. Whenever we eat starch from anything, whether it's potatoes, whether it's corn, whether it's wheat, as we digest that starch, we naturally produce large amount of maltodextrin in our intestine because it's an intermediate in the breakdown product of starch. And then what we do with that maltodextrin is we continue to break it down and we convert it to glucose or blood sugar. That's a natural process. Every time we eat anything with starch in it, we're exposing ourselves to large levels of maltodextrin, and then we just metabolize it to glucose. So what's it used for? It's used as a stabilizer, a sweetener, and a thickener in foods. But in sports drinks, it has a special role. When you combine it with glucose and fructose, the glucose gets in the bloodstream very rapidly, the fructose a bit slower, and the maltodextrin in that combination is the slowest of the three. So it helps provide sustained energy for a sports drink. So how does Shaklee use it? Well, Shaklee uses it in their chewable tablets in very tiny amounts that have no effect on blood sugar. That provides some palatability. It holds the tablet together. It aids in their dissolution. They use it in the performance, their sports rehydration drink. And again, if you have a sports drink, it's not just the rehydration. You're trying to provide sugar for that endurance exercise. Endurance exercise requires a lot of sugar for energy. So again, you're using it in combination with glucose and fructose to help sustain that energy for a longer period of time. That's what makes our performance so unique. And in the sports recovery drinks, the physique, it's part of the carbohydrate package. Remember, we need carbohydrate to drive that protein to the muscle cells, but also replenish the glucose needed to replace those energy stores depleted by exercise. So what are the concerns that are raised about maltodextrin? Well, if you see it's vilified as a sugar. It's just another sugar that people are hiding in your foods. Well, that's not true. There are legitimate reasons for using it. Perfectly natural sugar. But remember, how it's used in the food becomes important. Is it with soluble fiber? How much of it's in the food? Is it with protein? All of these are very important components. And then they'll talk about most maltodextrin comes from genetically modified corn. And I'm just going to give you a couple of bullets here. There's not time in this webinar to expand on genetic modifications. I will tell you, all of you who are subscribed to my Health Tips from the Professor, as the emails go out the next couple of weeks, you will get an invitation to a free webinar on the truth about genetically modified foods. But I'll just make 2 points here. Maltodextrin is highly purified. There is no genetically modified material left in the maltodextrin, so there is no health concern from the maltodextrin. And the second point is that non-genetically modified crops are often more contaminated with herbicides such as Roundup than the genetically modified crops. But again, not time to go into that here. I'll cover that in my webinar. That's coming up January 14th, 8 p.m. You can get the link from Health Tips from the Professor. And the final thing you hear on the website is it causes digestive issues. And as with any other natural food, people have food allergies, could have digestive issues. But that's just a food allergy. So, summing up our webinar tonight, the formulation and manufacture of vitamins, as Barbara said at the beginning, isn't a simple process. It's complex, it's sophisticated, it's science-based. When we think about, as consumers, we don't always understand the lengths that Shaklee goes to provide us with products that are pure, that are safe, that are effective and clinically proven. And, in answering some of the questions you get from your consumers, they don't always realize what they're asking, because they're asking for products that are clinically proven, that are natural, that are organic, that are non-GMO, that are free from any of their suspect ingredients, and most of those are just myths out there anyway, and they want ones that are pure. My advice is to say which 2 or 3 of those do they really want. You're gonna have to choose. And that's what people don't understand is you want products that are pure, that are scientifically valid, that are natural. You're going to have to see some of these other things may or may not be possible.
Or necessary.
Mm-hmm. So the bottom line, lots of manufacturers cut corners. But, as a research scientist, I trust Shaklee because of their purity, their safety, their effectiveness, the clinical proof that the products work, and the integrity. And I found this picture that says it all. Integrity is doing what is right, even when it's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
That's really good.
And just for those of you that want to know, I do have a weekly blog where I try and give you accurate information to counteract a lot of the myths and the lies and the hype that's on the internet. It's called healthtipsfromtheprofessor.com. So that's the website that you can go to subscribe. And if you do subscribe, get on my email list, you'll find that link to the webinar on the truth about genetically modified foods.
Thank you, Professor.
Very nicely done, Dr. Chaney.
Joe, do we have some questions
that
we can field real fast? Oh, yeah.
This person says they saw an article this morning where a doctor was claiming that if the vitamin C you are buying has ascorbic acid in it, it is no good because ascorbic acid is not a complete vitamin C. Shaklee has ascorbic acid on the label. Can you address that?
For heaven's sakes.
Isn't that amazing?
Okay,
So if you buy a vitamin C product and it doesn't have ascorbic acid on the label,
that doesn't have vitamin C.
That's not vitamin C in it.
Oh, Lord. But you know what I suspect maybe behind that is that ascorbic acid is vitamin C. But what I love about the Shaklee vitamin C is it's the whole vitamin C complex.
Right. You'll see the hesperidin complex, the grapefruit extract, rosehip extract. Depending on which product you're looking at, you've got the whole complex with it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so if it's just ascorbic acid, that means they've extracted just that portion of the vitamin C complex.
Right.
And Shaklee has the whole well, that's why they call it a vitamin C complex, because it's the whole thing. Mm-hmm. Okay, we spend a ton of money to feed our family organic every month. Any basic groceries we'd likely be wasting our money on?
That's an actually interesting question. I don't remember off the top of my head. Barbara, you might remember this, but there is a list out there of fruits that are, where it's really critical. I know strawberries are on that list.
Celery is on that list.
Celery.
Yeah. It has to do with when they begin spraying them, and peaches, thin-skinned ones. But she raises a really interesting point. I was with a farmer last week, and he feels that the name organic now is being used for marketing purposes and may not always be valid. So interesting point that you're raising, Jennifer. But anyway, I can give you that list. There's a list of the most important foods to buy organically. Good point. Mm-hmm. And then Carolyn asks about fructose and high fructose corn syrup, and she says, I thought fructose was good.
Well,
and high fructose corn syrup was not. Mm-hmm.
Right. So what I was addressing was the myth. The myth out there, and again, if you look at the websites that will tell you how bad high fructose corn syrup is or how bad fructose is, they're talking about it's going to increase your triglyceride levels, it's going to cause heart disease, and all of those things, which is exactly what we were told a number of years ago in the 70s about glucose and sucrose. That's a myth. All sugars are equally bad or equally good, depending on how you shape it up. There are no villains. There are no heroes. Fructose is better than many sugars primarily because it's absorbed slowly, and therefore it causes a smaller blood glucose spike and a smaller insulin spike than other sugars. That's where that's the benefit of using fructose.
We're getting a question about non-GMO soy versus GMO soy, and wondering if the studies that have been negative were used with. Isn't it like 80 or 90% of soy grown in the United States is genetically modified? Anyway, do you want to comment on that? I know we didn't want to get into the whole genetically modified conversation tonight, but do you want to mention something about the soy?
Well, in the first place, if you talk about negative studies, most of those have not been done in humans. Most of those have been done in mice or rats or even in cell culture. The clinical studies have almost all been that it's either has no effect or it's beneficial. So there really are no negative studies in human beings. Now, the other thing that I can mention briefly is when you're talking about genetically modified versus non-genetically modified soy, there is a possibility that can make a difference when you're talking about the protein itself. And that's because people can have allergies to proteins. If you modify the protein, you can modify the food allergies. But once you start talking about things like maltodextrin or high fructose corn syrup that are purified from the product, from corn, it really makes no difference whether it came from genetically modified or non-genetically modified, because all the genetically modified material has been removed in the purification of the final product.
Okay.
Well, and speaking of allergies, a question on how does one develop an allergy to certain foods?
That's a very controversial subject. There's a theory now that a lot of the allergies are being developed just because we are keeping our children in such a sterile environment that they're not down in the ground grubbing in the soil and all that sort of thing when they're toddlers. So I don't have the expertise to tell you where we develop allergies from, but
even the other there's another theory around it that has to do with developing leaky gut issues from the overuse of antibiotics, which is in the news again about the superbugs and the overuse of antibiotics, that over time, when you keep killing off the probiotics, the natural microflora that you want in your lower intestine, if you keep killing them off with steroid-based drugs or antibiotics and so on, then over time the bad stuff has nothing to inhibit it, including the candida yeasts, which then attach themselves to the walls of the intestines, and they poke holes in it, and they cause this leaky gut. And so one of the theories is that the toxins that are on their way out of the body in the gut now can migrate back through this damaged wall into the bloodstream, and then your immune system says this doesn't belong there and attacks it, and then you develop this kind of allergy. So lots of theories around it, but pleasant, right? But lots of theories around it, but it's also very much very reflective of reality of the American diet. We eat foods that are not in fact, I don't know if Hannah is unmuted, but we eat so many foods that are not healthy for us or our gut, because high in wheat. Today, wheat is 40 times the level of gluten that was in original wheat berries, according to the Wheat Belly books, and we eat such tremendous quantities of refined carbs over the choice of the natural foods that nature gave us that grow naturally out of the earth, which are the vegetables and the fruits. Those are the gentlest and the best for our gut and our intestines. So, there are times when we've had people who have had food sensitivities who have been able to improve their immune system and change their diet and improve the health of their gut. So we know there are a number of ways of approaching it. The theories of where it all comes from may still be debated, but it certainly is on the increase, I would say, right, Steve, in terms of the allergies. And then sometimes you said there's like genetic changes that take place when you move from one generation to the next.
Well, that's an interesting theory as well. You can show that in animal studies. We don't, I think we're extrapolating when we say that happens for sure in humans, but it is possible.
Yeah. So we're looking at it all, but I'm most interested in focusing on solutions, and we have lots of folks who have really, really good improvement around that. Pat asked about where this will be archived. It's at betterhealthin31days.com. And Julie asked about vitamin C that the Shaklee vitamin C is sourced from corn. Want to address that, Steve?
And actually, that's a question you would have to ask Dr. Daggy. I'm not sure where the Shaklee vitamin C is sourced.
Okay. And then, Joe, you want to take Woody's comment?
Where is that?
Dr. Robert Thompson.
Dr. Thompson wrote the book Calcium Lie 2. Oh, but what was he saying? Dr. Thompson, Robert Thompson, advocates whole C complex and states ascorbic acid alone found in many cheaper brands are not true vitamin C sources.
Exactly right. That's a major Shaklee difference.
Yep.
Good point. Very good point. Okay. How we do? I know.
Well, you can, and like some people, Jerry Steiner said, you Google the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15 in terms of, I think,
about which ones are best to buy organically.
Right.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Thank you. Yeah. And again, these will be archived at betterhealthin31days.com. Okay, Joe, is that it?
One here is all corn syrup GMO unless it's organic.
Say it again.
Is all corn syrup GMO unless it is organic?
Corn syrup. Steve?
Again, one can't say for sure, but the probability is very, very high. With corn, it's in, again, I think it's 80% or more of the corn grown in this country is genetically modified. So chances are good.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh! Thank you, everybody.
Great webinar.
And thank you, Dr. Chaney. Oh, this is great. And we really have just hit the tip of the iceberg around this topic. We're going to be revisiting it in the coming year and adding even additional insights. We will talk about genetically modified in the session. And this is our last session, though, for 2014. Wish you all a really wonderful holiday, a wonderful end of the year, and a really happy new year and healthy new year. Thanks for joining us all this past year. And thank you, Joe. Thank you, Dr. Chaney.
You're welcome.
And happy holidays, everyone.
Merry Christmas to everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.